In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. With me tonight is Jennifer Verne, our research manager on Spirit and our podcast producer.
Hello, good evening.
Also, Heather Lawson, our case manager on Spirit, as well as our podcast director.
Hello.
And myself, of course. Tonight's subject, again, is the Amherst Mysteries. And let's get underway.
All right, Amherst, Nova Scotia, Canada, August 1878. Amherst, Nova Scotia is a small little town, about 3,000 population. Mostly farming, some commercial, normal little town up in Canada in the 1800s.
Funny story about that. When I was in the service, one of the, I think it was actually when I was in Sea Cadets, we were going to have to work with the Thunder Bay group, and one of the guys that was serving with me said, that's from a different country. I go, yeah, I'm aware of that. He goes, it's from Nova Scotia. I go, no, it's from Canada. And he goes, no, they're from Nova Scotia, Thunder Bay. I go, Nova Scotia is an area in Canada. I said, you weren't good in geography, were you? He says, no. I said, just in case, I said, you need to know the Russians are in Russia. I go, and I walked away. But just a side note there, I had to share that. Go ahead.
In Nova Scotia, at number 6 Princess Street, lived 18-year-old Esther Cox. She lived there with her sister Olive, Olive's husband Daniel Teed, Daniel's brother John Teed, her 2 nephews Willie and George, her other sister Jane, and her brother William Cox. That's a big family to be living in a small little house, right?
Yeah.
So Jane, Esther's sister, was the beauty of the family, and she had a job outside the home. Esther was more on the drab, dowdy side. She didn't have a job outside. She worked within the home. The reason they were all in the house together is that the Cox parents were gone by this point. The mother had died giving birth to Esther or shortly after her birth, at which point the dad left and he moved to America and got married again and never had anything more to do with the family.
Wow.
So that's why all of this family was living together with Olive and her husband Daniel.
Sure.
And because of this, and because of Esther's situation, she was basically a glorified maid for the family, really.
Sure.
Oh, goodness.
Kind of a Cinderella story.
Yeah. So Daniel was the foreman at the local boot and shoe factory. Brother William, Esther's brother, also worked at the factory. The night of August the 27th kicked off a year of chaos for Esther and her family. She had been dating a man named Bob McNeil. He was an employee of Daniel's, was a good employee, but the family didn't care for him much and tried to warn Esther off on him. But Esther, finally having found somebody, Jane was always the pretty one and always had everything. Esther was excited to have a beau of her own.
Sure.
So the night of August the 27th, Bob took Esther on a carriage ride, and it ended badly. During that carriage ride, the story is that Bob assaulted her, tried to get her out of the carriage and into the woods, even threatening her with a firearm. He was interrupted in this by another carriage that came along, and that stopped the assault, and Bob ended up taking her home. Wow. It was raining, she was cold, she was wet, really shaken up by the whole thing. She didn't tell anybody about what had happened, But at this point, it marked a big change in her behavior over the next week that the family noticed. She was becoming really withdrawn and
Sure.
quiet. On September 4th, about a week after, Jane and Esther were sleeping, because in houses like this, you shared beds and bedrooms and things like that, right?
Yeah, very small, yeah.
Yeah, so they were in the same bed, obviously, in the same room. And Esther thought something was in the bedclothes. Maybe a mouse or something was rustling through the bedclothes. And she woke up Jane like, there's something in the bed, something is in the bed. And they got up, nothing was found. The next night, on September the 5th, both girls were sleeping, and they heard noises under the bed. Jane didn't want to go through this again, so they got up, looked under the bed. The only thing under the bed was a green box of quilt scraps. So they think,
Which was standard back then, because they made all their quilts. That was a big thing.
Exactly. So that's not uncommon to have under the bed. So they thought maybe something is in the box. Let's take the box out and shake it out.
Sure.
So they pulled the box out, and it sprang into the air twice in front of the girls. The girls screaming and everything's going on. Family comes rushing in. Daniel obviously didn't see it because he comes in after the fact and just like laughing it off. No, it didn't happen. So they finally all go back to bed. The next night, September the 6th, Esther is not feeling well. She's got a fever. She goes to bed, wakes up in the middle of the night, pale, in pain, almost kind of like a sleepwalking episode, not really there, but there. Jane's like, again. So the family comes in. Esther's very chaotic. She's having seizures. She says her skin feels swollen and itchy, and she just is not good. And then there's a loud boom in the room that everyone hears. And then it booms 3 more times. And then immediately Esther goes calm again.
Wow.
And is back out.
Wow.
Quiet. September 10th comes around, and Esther is again very feverish. They're awoken this time because the covers are pulled off the bed. They pull the covers back up. The covers get pulled off the bed again. And pillow under Esther's head flies across the room. Sister Olive comes in, and she tries to put the covers back on the bed. Esther is now complaining of a headache. Her head hurts. Boom sounds again through the room. Esther immediately goes calm and falls asleep.
Wow. Now, Bob's out of the picture at this point, so
Bob's out of the picture.
Okay.
Yes, she didn't see Bob or have anything more to do with Bob after that.
Okay, so not related to Bob, obviously.
Well, we'll see.
Uh-huh.
We'll see. September 11th, the family is like, okay, we've got to do something. This is not good. So they call in the family doctor, Dr. Carrot, and he decides to come over after Esther and Jane are already asleep. He wants to see what's going on, not make too big of a deal of it. So Esther and Jane are sleeping. He comes in. It's around 10 o'clock at night, I think, based on what I was reading. And he thought that Esther was dealing with a nervous excitement. Air quotes, nervous excitement. Y'all, for, Victorian age medicine, every woman has a nervous condition, right?
Yes.
And that this nervous excitement could have been caused by a recent shock. She had not told anybody yet about the situation with Bob.
What happened?
Yeah,
She didn't mention anything.
A little bit of victim trauma there.
Right. So as the doctor's talking to Daniel about this, the pillow on the bed flips over twice in front of the family and the doctor. And Daniel is actually trying to pull the pillow, and it's supposedly stuck in the air, and he can't get it out, pulled out of the air.
Wow.
This excitement happens again. Everything that's been going on the past few days starts happening again.
Yeah, and imagine he's a pretty stout lad working in a factory, so...
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
The booming sounds start again. The bedclothes are ripped off the bed again. Scratching noises are heard. And it's determined to be coming from the wall by the bed. So they move the bed, and supposedly scratched into the wall is, Esther Cox, you are mine to kill.
Wow.
Oh, goodness.
So this intrigues the doctor, and he's like, I'm coming back tomorrow. We're going to...
Sure. At this point, it's an oddity, yeah.
This is weird. So on September 12th, Dr. Carrot comes back, and he's hanging out with the family, and Esther's doing her chores and whatnot. He's there during the day now.
Okay.
Okay, it's not night, during the day. She goes down to the cellar, and a piece of wood from the stack of firewood is flung across the room at her.
Wow.
She comes running back up. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. The doctor's
the
like...
kill part's starting to begin, yeah.
Right. The doctor's like, okay, let's go down, see. The doctor goes down with her. There are potatoes thrown at them from across the room in the cellar.
Wow.
And then more booms start sounding throughout. And the booms are happening for the next 2 hours.
Wow.
So the doctor says, okay, I think we need some sedatives to help keep Esther calm and quiet because she's, getting more and more agitated. And it's going to help her sleep, and maybe the disturbances will calm down. That doesn't happen. That night, more disturbances, more noises, more objects are flying around the room and the house.
Wow.
Okay. So during one of these nights, towards the end of September, Esther finally tells Dr. Carrot the story about what happened with her carriage ride and Bob McNeil. Mm-hmm. After, though, she doesn't remember having done that. So it's almost like she was in a trance and told the story.
Yeah.
And then came out of the trance and didn't remember having told the story. So the doctor and the family think, well, let's try and communicate with the spirit with knocks and taps.
Sure.
So they start doing knocking and tapping, call and response sessions is what we would call them today, right?
Yeah.
And there's more information about those in the actual book that I'll tell you about later.
Okay.
But we're not going to go into that.
I tell you what this reminds me of is a certain ghost story from witch story from Tennessee.
The Bell Witch?
Yeah. Because, with Thomas and these daughters and the scratching on the walls, the booming, the banging, I mean, you see a lot of the same paradox or parallel instances here.
So this goes on. Booming sounds can be heard outside the house. So not only are these booming sounds inside the house, they're heard outside the house. And now the family is concerned because the people are going to start hearing this in town.
Sure.
People are going to start talking what is going on. And about this time, people are figuring out what's going on. Newspapers start running stories about this whole thing. So we can go to newspapers.com and you can pull up 1878 Amherst, and you will see this newspaper articles all about the situation and scenario that's going on.
Sure.
People are traveling all over Canada and North America to come see for themselves. So now they got people hanging out in the streets, waiting for the booming sounds. They have people coming into the house to talk to Esther, to try to talk to the spirits, to hear the tapping and the knocking and the banging.
Sure.
So Esther starts to perform for the crowds. Kind of like a medium type ship. She can sense what you've got in your pockets. Because the spirits are telling her how many coins you have in your pocket. So this goes on for months. In December of 1878, Esther gets diphtheria. And while she's sick, nothing happens in the house. Once she is better, she goes and she stays in Sackville, which is a town a little bit of ways, I think, for about 2 weeks. And during the time she's gone, the house is quiet.
Okay.
So it kind of sounds kind of like a poltergeist
that's
type
what I'm
situation,
thinking.
right?
Yeah.
Right.
And how old was she at this point again?
18.
18, okay.
18-year-old who had gone through tremendous shock. But, at that time, an 18-year-old really was a woman at that point. You know what I'm saying?
True.
It's
Well,
not like
most of
she's
those Appalachian areas, 16 was a woman. So
exactly.
I mean,
So it's not like she's a 12 or 14-year-old going through puberty yet. She's 18. So when she comes back, the phenomenon starts up again. And things really kick up and get bad. So Esther now says that she hears voices and they are threatening fire. So Esther had mentioned that her skin felt staticky, like charged, electrically charged. And a visitor had mentioned that Esther's problems were caused by a buildup of excess electricity. Daniel doesn't believe this, and he doesn't worry about electricity because electricity can't start fires. They didn't know back then that electricity can start fires.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, electricity was
And
kind of
then
a new
some.
thing, right? So Daniel doesn't believe this threat of fire, But when he says that, lit matches start appearing out of thin air in the house.
Oh.
So 3 days later, a fire actually starts in the cellar. Esther runs and gets her brother, and they quickly put it out.
Sure.
And there's nothing serious.
Obviously,
but
no one in the cellar around when it happened.
It didn't say if Esther was down there when it happened or if she noticed it and went down and found it. I don't recall. But in a small town, And I've seen pictures of the Amherst Princess Street, and the houses are side by side.
Yeah, you're not keeping any secrets
made of
there.
wood, right?
Yeah.
They were
If
all
Daniel's house caught on fire,
they all go. They'd lose 8 or 10
would
of
go.
them. Yeah.
That whole street would go. So Esther now claims that not only does she hear things, now she sees a ghost. And this ghost is actually threatening to burn the place down.
Wow.
Daniel can't have her at the house anymore. So she has to leave.
Yeah. Makes sense.
The end of January 1879, Esther is sent to live with neighbors in town.
Okay.
The Whites.
To get her out of the house so she don't burn the place down.
Exactly. So they sent her to live with the Whites. Mr. White is not put off by the occurrences, and we'll find out.
Well, they're still going on in
They're
his life.
still going on.
Ah.
They're still going on. But he's not put off, and we'll find out why in a little bit.
Okay.
But, of course, he never left her at his house alone. So she went to work with him. He owned the saloon in town.
Well, yeah. I
Okay.
can see a profit getting ready to be made.
So she starts in the kitchens, but she doesn't stay there long. She ends up performing her parlor tricks in the main dining area for guests.
Sure.
And all these people coming from all over Canada and North America, right?
Yeah.
So she is now doing fortune teller type stuff. Coins, what's in your pockets. The spirits are giving her information.
Sure.
Right? Okay. So we've got like little psychic seance-y type stuff going on, right?
Yet, some spirit marked her for death.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right? But Mr. White has a lot of clientele now coming to his establishment to see Esther. Then the White's house gets hit by a fire.
Wow.
And then, while Esther is working in the saloon one day, she is attacked with a knife. A knife is stabbed in her back.
Wow.
Oh, goodness.
There's something about the spirit took the knife out of the hand of a boy who had the knife and stabbed it in Esther's back.
Wow.
Okay. So March rolls around, March of 1879. Things have gotten too hot in Amherst now, so she goes to New Brunswick.
Okay.
And this time she lives with a Captain James Beck. And she's there with Mr. Beck for 3 weeks. Doctors and spiritualists have all come to Mr. Beck's house. She's kind of on display now, poking and prodding. They question her, you know, the whole 9 yards. By now, she has 3 ghosts with her. We've got Bob Nickel, who's the pyromaniac. He's the one who wants to set the fires.
Yeah.
We've got Peter Cox, who is a relative of Esther Cox's of some sort. And Maggie Fisher.
Okay.
Quite a collection.
Yes. Yes, it's interesting how it's gotten so big and ballooned so much. So now she comes back to Amherst, and she moves in with a family called the Van Ambergs. They live on the outskirts of town in a little farm, and things are nice and calm. She does go back to working in the saloon, doing her little fortune telling and her seance spiritual stuff, right?
Yes.
Then things have calmed down enough. Nothing is happening at the Ambergs farm or anything. So then she goes back home to move back with her sister at the Teeds house. So she's there in the summer of 1879. At this point, her connection is much stronger, and she started to do automatic writing sessions. So this is where Walter Hubble comes into our story. He arrives in Amherst June 11th of 1879. Now, Walter Hubble is an actor. He claims he thought this whole thing was an act. He had seen magicians before.
Of course he did.
He could figure out how she was doing this and sniff it out and solve the issue, right?
Yes.
So he was actually a New York actor touring in Canada at the time. He didn't like spiritualism, as a friend of his was taken in by them. And so, you know, he figured, I can figure this out. Now, did he think that, or did he think, hey, I can find some profit in this, right? He is an actor. He knows the act of performing, right?
Sure. Showman.
So maybe he can make money by discounting Esther, right? The whole thing's a sham. Or does he really end up believing her once he sees what's going on?
Sure.
Because he comes to the house.
Either way, it's still profitable.
Either way, it's going to be profitable, right? So he supposedly becomes convinced, and he so convinced that Hubble takes her on tour. He wants to take her on tour around the
Which
theaters.
is what actors did back then. They
Yep.
went on tours between theaters.
Yep. He's going to have her tell her story. She's going to perform for the crowds like she's been performing at White's Saloon, right?
Sure, yeah.
And this didn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
They were only on tour for 9 days and it was done.
Wow.
Wow.
It might not have been good for Hubble. He didn't make the money he was
9
thinking.
days, yeah.
But it was awful for Esther.
Wow.
She was really put through a lot of trauma.
Well, you know, they always say that, you know, and I've always heard this in interviews with, like, rock band members and country band members, that being on the road, crammed in a bus, is not, you know, you can only imagine back then, you're going place to place in a wagon. So an 8-hour trip by bus is probably a 16-hour or even 72-hour trip by coach.
Right.
You know, it's not air conditioned, it's not heated, it's not comfortable.
Right.
You know, it'd be like riding my John Deere from here to Detroit. I mean, you know, it'd be a horrible trip.
Right. And not only that, but
And remember what happened last time she was in a carriage?
well, yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not only that, but in the audience, she's got hecklers heckling her that she's
Sure.
a con and she's making this up. And
Yeah,
this is all
especially in big cities,
baloney.
they more apt to discount in the country.
Yes,
And I
yes.
don't mean that by discounting country people, but I mean, you know, I just, in that period of time, the city had more educated people where the country didn't, and they would buy into it a lot quicker, I believe. Yeah.
Right, right. So after 9 days, they go back to Amherst. And once in Amherst, Hubble decides to stay with Esther. So he's with Esther for about a month through July. And he's got diaries that he's writing down all of this information. And you can still read his diaries now.
Wow.
And there's lots of stories of this time and what was used. And he used this when he finally wrote the book that I'll tell you about in a little bit. But in these diaries, you can actually see the recounts of their call and response sessions, their automatic writing sessions, things like that, daily. Okay, daily. His book was called The Great Amherst Mystery. And it was published, I think, in 1880, 1881, somewhere in there. So it was really quick.
Yes.
But, you know, within a year or two, he had his book published.
Yeah.
Wow.
So by now, she has 3 more spirits to join Bob, Peter, and Maggie. We have Mary Fisher, who is Maggie's sister.
Okay.
We have Jane Nickel, who is Bob's sister. And we have Elise McNeil, who is Bob McNeil's relative.
Ah.
Bob McNeil from the Carriage, at the
Carriage,
beginning of
yeah.
our story.
Okay.
Now, the very first time I heard this, I thought, well, Bob Nickel, how'd the guy from the Carriage die? It's not. The guy from the Carriage was Bob McNeil. This spirit, the pyromaniac, is Bob Nickel.
Ah.
Kind of interesting. Think about that a little bit.
Yeah.
So,
Starting to come together.
right. So, things are starting to kick off again, and they come to head when small fires start popping up around the house again. The Teeds now were threatened with eviction from the owner of the home.
Oh, yeah, you can't have them burning down your rental property.
No. So Esther was again sent back to the Van Amberg's farm, and everything was calmed down again. So the Van Ambergs is where she is.
Obviously,
the
she has to
calmest.
move a lot to keep, yeah.
Yes. And this is just almost now a year's span time.
Oh, yeah.
It's now August of 1879.
Wow.
It sounds like years worth of moving.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. But
Yeah.
this is all within a 12-month span here.
Well, you figure, you know, nothing gets active as far as pyrotechnics go, you know, or pyromania goes until 3 or 4 or 5 weeks. So if they move every month,
Right.
you know, it seems like it keeps it. But that, yeah, what a hell of a life, you know, gypsy
so
all the way around.
she's bounced all over the place.
Yeah.
So after a bit, she gets the job. She's on the Davidson farm. She's working as a maid until she burned down the barn of the
Yeah, you
Van
talk
Ambergs.
about a job change, career
Now-
change in a heartbeat. Yeah.
She confessed to this arson. She said that the voices in her head told her and convinced her to burn down the barn.
Well, there you go.
Okay. So she was convicted to 4 months prison term. However, the townspeople appealed. She had been through enough. This was not her fault.
Yeah.
So after 1 month in prison, she was released.
Wow. You know, I hate to say it, but I feel for her, because I've had those little voices when I'm drinking going, go ahead, I'm sure the potentate will not mind. And that usually always ends up in his office the next morning explaining myself. Anyway, yeah.
You know something about voices here, too.
Oh, yeah.
So after her release, the phenomenon stopped. No more knockings, no more fires, no more parlor tricks in the saloon.
Sure.
She put it all behind her, and she never wanted to talk about it again. She did get married finally, twice. She had one son by each marriage. And she ended up moving to to Massachusetts. Somewhere in Massachusetts.
Okay.
1912. And she died in 1912. I think it was 50, she was 52, something like that.
Wow.
So, conclusions here. Is the story true? Is it based in a truth? Did we have some issues going on that got expounded?
Well, when she moved to Massachusetts, did everything stop?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, there was never any other issues. So again, my first thing is poltergeist activity brought on by the trauma from the carriage ride.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
And then maybe once she saw what was happening, maybe she's like, hey, I don't want to be a maid anymore. Maybe I can make some money. Maybe I can expound on this, right?
Sure.
So, Hubble did make a nifty little profit on his book. The book had 10 different editions.
Wow.
So, it kept getting readership and reprinted and stuff like that.
I wonder if it still continued, though, and she suppressed it.
And that's possible.
I mean, a lot
know.
of psychics try to turn it. I know, with some of the stuff we've been researching lately, and I don't want to give off a lot of... sorry, it's going to make a lot of noise. I didn't think it would. They some of them have the ability to suppress and or turn off their ability. Other ones don't. I was reading a caption on one that went to stay at a known active home, and it was so many spirits and so active she had to leave at midnight and said, it's just too noisy, I can't sleep here, I can't turn it off, and I can't get away from hundreds of spirits talking to me, and I have to go somewhere else. And she ended up going to the Holiday Inn. I mean, I kind of halfway wonder if she was able to suppress some of that. And and two, we're talking, this started 1878. 78. So, we're not that far out of the Civil War.
Right.
So, we've got a fairly, a country that's recovering economically, and they're trying to patch together. I noticed most of her travels are in the north. So,
well, in Canada.
Yeah, in Canada. Yeah. So, with us, they didn't want to come down here so much because of, that's post-Civil War.
Right.
Nova Scotia, from what I understand of it. And of course, for those that watch The Money Pit, I would like to add we do not have permission. That is simply the copyright of the History Channel. Anyway, and we're not promoting them today. Anyway, but when you look at it, that was a kind of I don't want to say a trapper town, but it was a small town. All those towns up there were they were connected, but they weren't. They were very rural, very
right.
Very, very rural, to the point that, but still, it managed to get to the newspapers, and that shows you how back then the word of mouth was really the popular venue of media,
Right, and then, so that brings in the newspapers. So, there are actually letters from White to Hubble saying, Hubble, guess who I've got here?
Yeah.
Guess what she can do?
Yeah.
You better come get her quick if you want to take her, because other people are going to take her.
Sure.
So White is trying to get Hubble to take her on tour, because White is in on this with Hubble.
Sure.
They're kind of like business partners on this tour. So that Hubble had already planned to take her on tour before he even got to Amherst.
Oh, yeah.
That's evident in the letters.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, did Hubble become a spiritual believer? Because after this, his public stance on spiritualism is greatly changed. Now he is pro-spiritualists. Is this really that he believes, or is this he's going to pretend to believe so he can sell more of his books, more editions?
And we all know that, and I made this evident when we made the video for YouTube on skepticism. The quickest way to make a skeptic a believer is have something happen.
Right.
It's we were talking about Dr. Carrot, who treated her initially in the beginning. He stood by it all of his life, as I understand from your research. Yeah,
he did.
So I always tell this story. During a paranormal university, we had a couple that came in together, which is nothing unusual. And it was kind of the way the wife believed, the husband didn't, or boyfriend, I can't recall which it was. But anyway, the fact of the matter is he took the course because either she made him, or he thought it was in his best interest to keep her happy, and he took the course. Either way, he was there. He wasn't protesting. He just was along the ride, and he really wasn't that interested. And, I told him, I said, look, here's how I feel about that. If you're going to play on your phone or any of that and disrupt the class, you're out of here. I said, I'd rather, I'll get you off the hook for you and just tell them that you can. I said, but, oh, no. I'll be professional. I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be nice. I'll do whatever you ask me to do reasonably. So, during the period of the class, we got through most of the classroom session. Toward the end, we're doing the actual investigation. Comes with Paranormal University. One of the guys came up to me, one of our crew, and said, "Hey, Chief, you're not gonna believe this. That big tall guy just took on out of here like his ass was on fire, and he's out in a car, out in the parking lot." I go, "Doing what?" He goes, "I don't know." He said, "He just took on." He said, "I'm not kidding you. He looked peakedly scared." And I said, okay. So I go up to the girlfriend, wife, whatever she was. I said, what happened to your guy? She goes, I don't know, but whatever happened, it scared the hell out of him. He's out of here. I go, okay. So I tell everybody, so I'm going to walk to the parking lot and speak to this gentleman, try to ascertain what is going on. So I walk out and I knock on the door, and he rolls down the window. And he's pale as a ghost, and he looks really shook. And I go, are you okay? And he says, yeah, I'm fine. He says, I'm pretty sure I'm fine. I said, well, did you get hurt physically? He says, not physically. And I said, well, what happened? And he starts telling me how they were talking on the K2 with a spirit, and that they believe the spirit to be a child. And he said, and he was kind of challenging in a halfway. He told the child, he said, well, if you're really a kid, he said, I love children. Come up here and grab my hand and we'll go walking. He says, something grabbed my hand. He says, I said, so I got the hell out of there is what? He said, I ran clear down here and into the car. I said, did a kid come with you? He says, Jesus, I hope not.
Oh, no.
And he said, I said, well, would you like to come back in? Maybe we can work through this. And, well, I said, and he says, nope. He says, I now believe in ghosts. And he says, tell my girlfriend or wife, she can take him for a walk. And that was it. He spent the next 3 hours in the car.
Oh, my goodness.
He didn't sleep. Every time I had to keep a check on him to make sure, because sometimes that can trigger health conditions. And so I want to make sure he's okay. But, he was perfectly fine. He even left once and went to the bathroom at the gas station because he wouldn't come in the building to go to the bathroom. And so, there's no quicker way to make a skeptic a believer is to be involved. And I think, if we go back to Harry Houdini, who was one of the greatest, exposers of fakes, he would always sit, it wouldn't take him long. The more he exposed, the more he learned about how they fake these things, and when the psychic readings and so forth, the better he became. And it wasn't, he wasn't in he wasn't a seance more than, 10 minutes, and he'd start going, well, this is what you're doing, and you're doing here and this, and, he'd tear them right apart. And there is a few instances where he couldn't explain them.
Right, and I thought about Harry Houdini when I was doing this, because this is in his time.
Yeah, it is.
This was going on in his time, and I would love to know if I can find correlation that he actually commented about this situation or whatnot. But, Hubble says that he believed, because his theory was that Bob McNeil was possessed with the spirit of Bob Nickel, and that during that interaction, Nickel was the one that instigated Bob McNeil to do that to Esther.
Sure.
And at that time jumped from Bob McNeil to Esther and latched onto Esther at that point. That was Hubble's theory on what the situation was.
Well,
but the other issue we have to think here is our local newspapers and our articles are our sources.
Yeah.
Did this really happen, or was this just a salacious story that the newspapers started,
I could see that, yeah.
And it was not uncommon for newspapers, even like today, tabloids, fake news, anything to sell a paper. You can just look at Jack the Ripper stories from London from the 1880s.
Uh-huh.
And all the Jack the Ripper letters.
Yes.
thousands of letters, and maybe one could have been written by the actual murderer. Most of them were written by reporters and sent in to different newspapers, just so they could print the article.
Well, not only that, they get to be more famous and they get better pieces. I mean, you know, it's always been that way because that's part of the corporate ladder.
Right.
And, you know, and it's interesting to know, and people don't really realize that, there was tabloids back then.
Yes,
I mean, you know,
absolutely.
there was also, I remember, I don't remember what show I was watching, but they were talking about the dime novels, Western dime novels. And most of those were made up stories, you know, and but it sold, you know, Dirty Laundry sells, isn't it? What's the singer, Give Us Your Dirty Laundry? It came out, and boy, that shows how I can't think of it off the top of my head. Very famous band, I should know, but yeah, Give Us Your Dirty Laundry. And
are you thinking about the Fabulous Thunderbirds?
Maybe, and we'll have to look that up. But anyway, yeah, I mean, this Dirty Laundry sells, you know, and I always laugh because, you know, people will buy. I was in the grocery store the other day, and, you know, of course, you've got your Sun and Inquirer and all these magazines. I watch, and it's not always just women, women and men both. They'll go through these. I'm thinking, what the hell are you doing? You know, I had to laugh because when they indicted Trump the other day, past President Trump, they said one of the witnesses was the owner of Sun Magazine. I thought, oh, wow, he's got a leg up there. Because, yeah, this is the same paper that ran Elvis is not really dead. He just went back home, like the Men in Black said. He's just from Venus. You know, I'm thinking, yeah, you know, I don't want those as a character witness in a trial I'm in. That isn't helpful. And I mean, you know, they have no credibility, you know, well, I'm probably going to kick back for saying that. But, you know, in my mind, in my own personal opinion, they have no credibility in the social media or in the media world, and I mean, most people don't take them too seriously. Now, if you say the New York Times said it, and that's why these writers wanted this. If they could, you know, they might have, you know, embellishment was a big thing back then.
Right. So was something weird going on? Was there some poltergeist activity going on that then got expounded and just blown up, and then Esther and the family like, oh, we can't really say that didn't happen. Like a pillow being stuck in the air and Daniel couldn't pull it out of the air because it was stuck in the air. Could that be an
she's making money too. I mean, let's face it. You know, she's getting something out of this.
I don't know that Esther got anything out of this.
You don't think she did? Well, I mean, it may not be.
I bet Hubble and White, probably White took a small percentage. I would bet Hubble took a big percentage of it.
But still, she's getting free room and board. She's getting food.
That's true.
So, I mean, you know, there is some.
She wasn't the lowly maid, the lowly, sister in the house anymore.
And she was famous. People walking down the street. You know, if you're a psychic, I mean, you know, and I always joke because I can't remember the psychic's name that was from Jamaica. It had all the TV commercials, and the federal government got her. And I thought, you know, if she was good, she'd have seen that coming. But anyway, yeah, I can't remember her now. It's been years ago, but she was all over the 900 number. Call her, and you know, she sees all, knows all. Yet
Isn't that Cleo?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it, Madam Cleo. Yeah, and the ATF got her. Not ATF.
Jamaican.
No, the marshals got her. Yeah, she wasn't even. I thought that was hilarious, but there was a lot of people. She was making big money. So, you know, if Esther gets out and walks down the street and people recognize her and they come and go, oh, well, you know, I need to talk to my brother, or, you know, can you tell me what this is? Or, you know, she's got notoriety and fame.
Well, not only did she have notoriety and fame then, but I never heard of this story, but it's evidently very, very well known in Canada, and Amherst still even has a festival yearly for Esther Cox.
Oh, there you go.
Mystery.
Yeah.
So yeah, the town is very proud of
festival
Esther.
that we need to go to.
I know, right?
Yeah, living in, well, I mean, she's now a legend because she's living in.
She is a legend. She is.
So so anyway, I mean, you know, I could see both ends of this thing. And spiritual movement was very popular then. That was the big time into the early 1900s.
It really was. Yeah.
You know.
And, you know, if the carriage encounter did happen, and if it did throw her into a nervous excitement issue, where she started having some poltergeist activity based on her own internal energy.
It's a trigger.
Levels.
It could have been a trigger.
Absolutely could have been a trigger. Absolutely.
There's different things that cause some people who've never had any psychic or kinetic ability to suddenly become active, and it just takes one trigger, and that might have been it. Back then, that would be very traumatic. Not that any attack on a female wouldn't be traumatic, but more so then than today, you know, because I think today people have ways of venting and channeling that out and counseling. And back then you
there's
didn't.
much more.
No, there's a lot more permanent
outlets.
damage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I could see that as being a trigger. So I mean, it.
Yeah.
Now, how did you find this story? I know.
Well, not only do I now do a podcast with y'all, but I am an avid podcast listener. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I came across this during a podcast.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Well, that's fine.
And so I was like, I have never heard of this story. And I just became interested, as I do with any weird topic. I just delve headfirst in and
I need to know more.
see what I can find. Exactly.
I've not heard of this one's the reason I asked. Now,
yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm a know-all, see-all in the parapsychology and paranormal world, but I've been around a long time. And I've heard a lot of this one.
I know a lot of stories, and you mentioned something. I'm like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. This I had never.
You
heard
have a wealth of information stored. It's the problem is I think I've reached capacity in my memory, and so it pushes other things out. So I can remember bits and pieces and not all the names, and I have to sit and think about it. Maybe my age, but I'm not admitting to that.
So that episode in SpongeBob where he's throwing stuff out?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, trying to find the right thing. And I mean, I always terrified. My mind works like a carousel. I have to wait for the right horse to come around to remember what's going on with it. And
so there are actually several podcasts about this, both on the paranormal side and on the skeptical side.
Sure.
So you can find, and I've listened to both sides of the argument, and both sides have very valid points. It's one of those that we're just never going to know. You either believe or you don't believe. And me personally, I think we're somewhere in the middle. I think Esther had some issues going on that got blown out of proportion by the media of the day just to bring in...
I'm taking the fact that time validation was almost impossible because, sources were loose. I liked you brought
even
something about...
Even nowadays, validation is difficult because sources, because you never know what ulterior motives are.
Well, and that's it. I think, I was talking to a guy that teaches criminal law one time, and a professor, and it was when I was a professor teaching at college, and I asked him about credibility. He says, well, it's a funny thing. He says, everyone's credible to a certain degree. He says, until they find something that makes them uncredible. He says, that's really the catch. He said, you can have tons of titles and everything else. He said, but if you're caught in one lie, he says, it takes all those away very rapidly. And he says, when it comes to court, he said, it's easy arresting the guy. He said, and I say that, fictitiously, but he said, it's very easy to arrest someone. He said, but when you get up to the point of prosecuting someone, he said, that's when you start picking people apart. And he said, really, he says, somehow we've gotten away from truly looking for the truth from, hey, who can win this?
Right.
And,
right, precisely. Because just because you're caught in one lie doesn't mean that everything else you said is invalid, but you just invalidated it by making yourself unreliable.
And so now the attorney representing that guy has to rebuild from there, rebuild the character he's going to use it.
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Yeah. I had one of my lawyers through my divorce, and he's a good friend of mine. I've known him for years, and always says, I'll never ask you a question I don't already know the answer. He says, and I'm going to warn you, if I ask something by accident, just look at me and say, I'm not sure. He says, because if we haven't practiced, don't know what the answer is. He says, I don't want anything coming out of your mouth I'm not aware of. It saved time. Another good friend, good friend, Chris Zeller, who was passed by Raleigh. He was a fairly well-known attorney downtown. His brother was one of the state prosecutors. But I'll never forget, we were in a meeting, and he loved to be jovial. And we're in this meeting with a bunch of guys. We're arguing back and forth. I don't even remember what we were arguing about. And I swear to God, he breaks the middle of it and looks at us and goes, okay, I've heard both sides of this. He says, I'm pretty sure I can win either case. And I'll never forget. So, again, if you're good at what you do, you can get around those things. And I think that the credibility here lies in, what little bit we have is within the accounts and how credible the accounts.
Right.
You look at the sources. If we're talking about, whether it be any of the gentlemen that had her as handler, then you're looking at a one-sided view.
Right.
The doctor probably is the most nonpartisan view here in the whole thing.
Yeah.
But he has very little exposure, initially in a couple of days of treatment. But, he's probably the most credible witness she's got down there.
Yeah, because he lived the rest of his life saying, what happened to Esther happened to Esther. Yeah. It is true. I saw it.
Sure. So when you're picking this thing apart and you're starting to look at it, it does make it hard. I like the fact that in your research, you referenced Jack of the Ripper stories. Yeah, there was a lot of those that they believe now were embellished to the point that was incredible. Yeah. Now, there was nothing unincredible about how the bodies were basically dissected.
Yeah.
But, still, there was a lot of embellishment. And, it got better over the years, but still, I think they were talking about the Zodiac murders and how the paper handled that. And there was, of course, you get a lot of copycats now that want to
I'm
send stuff
actually
in.
listening to a podcast right now that's just,
about the Zodiac?
That's just redelving into that one. And that one is a difficult one.
Oh,
for
God,
me
yes, yeah.
And I'm not one, I don't get squeamish easily. I'm able to compartmentalize pretty well on my own.
Sure.
But there's something about that man that's just...
Well, and I think the funny thing is, of course, for those out there who have great conspiracy theories, I know those guys that wear, tinfoil hats around the house and all that kind of thing. And I have to tell this the other day because I have to mess with, we have this, and this is going to be an odd story, but it's funny. We have this account at Mike's Car Wash, and it gives you go through how many times you want a month for like $20, and the van's older, but I like it clean. I have certain standards, and for $20 it's worth it. Okay, so I put the guys put the sticker in. They don't let you put the sticker in. The sticker's made so if you try to move it or anything, it comes apart. So that way, so anyway, I may or may not have figured out how to do that, and so, but I put a piece of tape on the back of it, clear tape, to make sure it stays put, and I put it on very nice. And again, I don't have a need to take it out, really. I wash the antique truck I have maybe 4 times a year, and that's the only other vehicle we own. But I wanted to be able to remove it from the windshield, because the problem is I've got a ton of them things, and anybody that's ever had to sit with a straight blade razor and take that's a pain in the vacuum to get it all out of the vents, and I don't like that. So we pull in, and I never have a bit of trouble. I'm washing the van 100 million times, and all of a sudden we pull into this one, and this guy looks at me and goes, I think there's something wrong with your sticker. I'd like to get you another one. I said, no, thank you. Sticker works fine. And we're already ready to come in the car wash. And the guy says, well, I don't think it's even attached to the windshield. He says, let me reach in there. I said, you put your arm in this car, you will lose it. I said, I'm giving you advice. I said, that's called trespassing. I said, I'm going to take it as aggression. Do not put your arm in my car. And he looks at me and says, well, there's something wrong with that sticker. I said, you have 2 choices. I said, we can back out all 15 cars behind me and stop right here. I said, and I can leave. I said, and I'll call and cancel. I said, you can put me through, and I'll call and cancel, and I'm going to tell him your name and tell him what happened. Needless to say, he let me go through the car wash. We've never been stopped ever since. But then we got stopped by one. When he asked me, he says, well, what is that behind there? I said, I thought real quick. I said, that's EMF blocking tape. And, I said, and he says, well, why do you have it? I said, aliens. I just went on through. I thought, yeah, piss off, son. And anyway, but yeah, I couldn't resist, and so that's my story. Asked me, that is, that's EMF blocking tape keeps the aliens from getting in the car. So anyway, screw with me and I'll get you. That's the thing. But no, I couldn't resist. I had to put that out there. But I think a lot of people with the Zodiac case, and I don't want to get into another podcast, but the government kind of halfway hinted the military cryptos, which I worked with a lot of cryptos in the past, hinted that they broke the code, but they weren't giving it out. Well, there's 2 reasons why the service-related intelligence community, whether it's DOD or Homeland or whoever, or one of the military services intelligence communities, is either a risk to public safety, exposure or something they didn't want. So either the individual in question could cause an issue. Now, a lot of people go, well, they cover up if it's an ex-soldier or sailor. No, they don't. They really don't. They don't care. They don't care at all. No, I mean, now if it was a program the CIA was running, like, MK Ultra, oh yeah, they'll cover that up because they don't want that out. Yeah. And a lot of people go, well, they don't want to know they're doing it. No, they don't want to know they got caught. It's, I always used to say there was nothing wrong with Nixon. He just got caught. And I mean, he's no different than any other politician. I mean, and that to a certain degree is true. I mean, they all have some dirt somewhere. We all do. And, cast the first stone kind of thing. But, that case is very interesting because now we get down the road and an ex-Navy cryptologist said he cracked the code. He knew who it was. Well, it turned out the guy that he fingered, and I don't know if this is coming out in that podcast yet, but the guy he fingered was the one that the police thought was responsible all along.
Oh, my.
And they never had enough evidence to prove it. But this guy, think about that. That's someone, it took a cryptologist to decode it.
Right.
I mean, what kind of mind is that good? They always say that there's a very fine line between genius and insanity.
That's exactly where I was going.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I know some people that use that like a skip rope. And I mean,
Just look at any well-known author and artist,
Sure.
Van Gogh,
yeah,
Jack London. You can
Sure.
name any of the greats, and they were right on the cusp between
yeah.
genius and madness.
oh yeah. And I think that's what we're looking at. I think there's something to this, and it may never be told. I always laugh about the Kennedy assassination. I said, our kids or grandkids won't get the truth eventually. It'll come out. I mean, most of it's out now. There's enough out that makes people know that, Oswald wasn't the only guy there. I mean, there was enough gun activists in the area with firearms that, with intent that, no. And I mean, but I think when you look at it, it's the same way, and why I'm bringing this all to a big point is in parapsychology, when you investigate, this as our research manager, the big thing is that you have to look at everything very subjectively. And one thing is, for the Kennedy shooting, if you look at that and Roswell had his reasons, but Roswell didn't add up real good. And later on, I think they did find proof Roswell was involved in a CIA, I always named K Ultra or what, but he was involved in something that at the time.
He was enough involved that they could use him for the purposes they wanted to use him for.
Good handler could activate him, and
Oswald was a great scapegoat.
Yeah, and and you look at the fact that Kennedy was having sexual relations with Marilyn Monroe, which that wasn't going to go well because Kennedy and his wife were both the Camelot, they were the American dream, and they didn't want that being tampered with because the Democratic Party knew that was going to be a problem, and and if you don't think the Democratic Republican Party doesn't plan these things, you're wrong, and because I mean, if you look at it, whether you look at Nixon or them, they're all very moving factors. You got the mob involved in this. There was enough players in this thing. It's not a bad fact of if they did it, it's who did it. I mean, you've got the government, you got the mob. The mob may have been working for the government. Everybody was trying to use everybody else to get this shut down. Then you got Bobby Kennedy coming in closely behind. It's a problem. And so, it's very easily, you look at that subjectively, and you can kind of pick that apart. And it's the same way with this. When you look at this and you start looking at your accounts, you say, well, half of it's probably true and half of it isn't. And the problem is being able to separate that. And there's no validation, as we said before. So I think, honestly, though, obviously, I think what would convince me that it's true in some form is the doctor's account. Yep. I mean, and I think anybody would look at that and say, okay, that guy right there makes the story plausible. Right. So we know that it's not only plausible, but we're going to validate that something is happening. She has some sort of powers. And, a lot of psychics in that period of time, I mean, you go back 100 years, in 1700, that would be considered being a witch. And I mean, that would, or
in the 17 or 1600s.
Yeah, that was your immediate death. Yeah,
Yes.
Even back in the 16s, even the 1500s, that was witchcraft. Yeah. And I mean, so when you start looking at this, this is an oddity where what made that okay was spiritualism.
Right.
And so when she's going through that, it just was, it didn't kick off in the right way. If she didn't have the pyro involved as a spirit, she might have made out a lot better. Everybody hates it when it gets burns the house down.
Exactly.
I mean, and it's we
in
have
the
certain
barn.
in the barn. We have certain relatives that we don't appreciate always coming over, and I mean that's because of the fact that we don't want to endure the damage. I always said if we had a guest house, we go out and entertain them there, and not let them in the regular house. It'd be great. I think everybody has those family members. I mean that just comes with the program. So anyway, I always laugh about that and go on. But I think this is a great story. I do, in my personal opinion, I know about you guys, but I think it happened.
Yeah, I think something happened.
Something definitely happened.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to commercial break. We will be back with you very, very shortly. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. It is now time for the Ghost Story of the Day with Jennifer Verne.
The Doppelganger. Quebec, Canada, August 19, 1998. One night, a 10-year-old boy woke up to use the bathroom. He was a little scared to get up by himself in the middle of the night, but finally gathering his courage, he left his bedroom and made his way to the bathroom. To do so, he had to walk the length of the hallway, which passed by a galley-style kitchen. As he did, he turned to see his mother, or so he thought, sitting at the end of the table, her back toward him as she smoked her cigarette, something she frequently did. He knew it was her by the way the moonlight filtered through the curtains, highlighting her body as the smoke curled up and over her head. On his way back from the bathroom, he stopped at the kitchen. He was going to ask his mother to tuck him into bed. But although he could still see the curling wisps of smoke, his mother was nowhere to be found. Believing he would catch her before she went back to bed, he ran to her bedroom. She was asleep. Confused, he shook her awake and said, "Mom, how come you're asleep already? I just saw you in the kitchen." Surprised by her son's words, the young boy and his mother went to the kitchen to investigate. And although the ashtray on the table was empty, both mother and son could still smell the scent of tobacco lingering in the air.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That is the conclusion of tonight's episode of Ghost to Ghost and our ghost story today. We hope you have enjoyed this and this evening's episode. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at info@spiritindiana.com. And with that, I'm going to say good night and...
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening to Ghost to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd., all rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.